Brian Rose is a guy I first stumbled across about 6 years ago when I was trawling the internet for information about ayahuasca. It was around the time I first started to get curious about these plant medicines, and so I was reading and watching everything I could find from guys like Joe Rogan, Terence McKenna, Graham Hancock, all the usual suspects. And somewhere in that mix, I happened across this guy, Brian Rose, host of a popular podcast called London Real. Now, as you've probably guessed from the title of this video, I think Brian has taken a teeny bit too much of the old psychedelic sauce, and as a result, has started disappearing up his own arse. Just to be clear though, I don't hate the guy, and I think a lot of what he does on his channel is very good. But amongst quality guests like Dennis McKenna and Jordan Peterson, London Real will also host people of, shall we say, a slightly lesser calibre, such as the king of reptilian-themed conspiracy nutjobs, David Icke. In fact, it was one such controversial collaboration with David Icke which led to some of London Real's videos being removed from YouTube, on the basis that they contained misleading information suggesting that the current global pandemic is a hoax, and we'll get into the details of that later. But in a nutshell, Brian Rose platformed David Icke and let him rant utter shite, completely unchallenged. And it wasn't just that Brian didn't push back against what David Icke was saying, he was actually lapping it up and giving him a resounding endorsement as a champion of truth.
What do the rest of us do, David? What do we do? What's the way, David? What's the way out of this? Why are you more powerful than they are, David? Why? It seems so clear. It seems so obvious what you just said, David. I had a call with someone this week and they said, "What's David like?" And I paused and I said, "David is a great man."
Oh, Christ. Of course, when YouTube pulled the video for perpetuating dangerous misinformation, Brian Rose reacted in the calm and collected way that you'd expect from a successful, level-headed entrepreneur. Oh no, actually, he completely lost his shit and invented a global conspiracy that big tech is out to silence him. He spammed the shit out of his mailing list begging for money and declared himself as a messianic saviour that will restore truth and freedom to the internet in opposition to our digital overlords. So again, it's not that I particularly dislike Brian, it's just that he started acting like a total bellend. But Rob, I hear you cry, what has any of this got to do with psychedelics, you dashing existential rogue you? Well, it's that Brian's descent into the world of conspiracy bullshit seems to have kicked off around the time he went to an ayahuasca retreat in Costa Rica, during which he filmed a documentary and went through a separate messianic quest to save the world, while seemingly being oblivious to the fact he was neglecting his family for the sake of his own ego, and we'll get into that later. So that's what brought him back to my attention, because I do have an interest in people like this who react to psychedelics in a way that produces egotistical delusions of grandeur. And I think it's worth pointing out the red flags in their behaviour so that we, as a psychedelic community, can avoid making such mistakes. And I'm not going to lie, some of this just comes from my natural British inclination to be a snarky twat in the face of some obvious bullshit. But something like the pandemic has an actual body count attached to it. So if you're going to go out on your shield for fringe lunatics like David Icke, then a gentle bit of piss taking is the least of your problems. So, let's get into it. Most of Brian's recent misadventures have stemmed from his controversial relationship with David Icke and the subsequent censorship that resulted from it. Yeah, David Icke, the guy who thinks the world is run by shape-shifting lizard people.
This world is controlled by reptilian entities that occupy human form.
Basically, David Icke went on Brian's channel, London Real, and told the world that the current global pandemic is a total hoax and that any sickness is actually being caused by 5G cell phone towers. Okay. You know, I've got friends who live in the jungles of Peru, which is one of the worst hit countries by the pandemic, and where they are having severe problems with containing the virus. And trust me, when you get out into the middle of the Amazon, there aren't too many 5G cell towers out there, David, you complete fucking tit. Anyway, before we get into all that, let's backtrack a bit to see how Brian got himself into this state of being susceptible to such conspiracy theories. And I think it all starts back with this ayahuasca retreat. Now, quick disclaimer, this is not me blaming ayahuasca. Anyone who watches this channel will know that I am a huge proponent of ayahuasca. So let's not start building any strawman arguments that I'm part of the Illuminati. Just ignore that. That said, most people agree that the ayahuasca experience is not necessarily something to be taken lightly. I mean, all psychedelics can be extremely destabilizing, but something else they can do is vastly increase your own sense of ego, which is what frequently leads us to cliched headlines of some dude proclaiming themselves to be the savior, which is a trope that Brian seems to fall into fairly easily. I mentioned earlier that Brian made a documentary during his ayahuasca retreat, and I want to give him some credit here because this is actually a really solid film, and he doesn't shy away from showing the rough with the smooth, and I respect that. Still, the documentary does show some very questionable behaviours from Brian, which show that he really didn't seem to integrate anything at all from his ayahuasca experiences, and instead just started catering to his own ego. One example shown in some detail is that Brian begins to neglect his family due to his obsession with saving the world, even missing his young son's birthday. And the other is that he seems completely oblivious to certain unsavoury elements within his life, the most notable being a man he views as a father-like mentor. But to a casual observer such as me, yeah, this guy seems more like a massive, toxic shithead.
I like success, doing deals, and doing one after another after another. I mean, it's an aphrodisiac. I'm high on life. I don't need DMT or ayahuasca. Why? That's all horseshit. Those are for losers. I want you to kill, 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 kill. Run towards the gunfire and kill them all.
This creature is called Dan Pena, and you really have to see the documentary just to comprehend what an unbelievable arsehole he is. And this is that integration thing I keep banging on about. You can't just drink ayahuasca, trip your tits off, and expect to be transformed into an enlightened being. You need to put the work in, look at your life, make the tough choices, and part of that might be telling this cantankerous old twat to go and fuck himself. The point here is that Brian seemed completely oblivious to his own shitty behaviour and failed to do any real self-reflection after his ayahuasca sessions. He fell into the common trap of failing to get his own house in order and instead started getting distracted by grandiose slacktivism. But as Jordan Peterson often says, before you save the world, you need to clean up your room. So that's where I think it all kicked off, and now fast forward 6 months and it seems that Brian has absolutely lost the plot. He's fallen down the conspiracy rabbit hole, and this is where David Icke enters the story. It's actually pretty amazing to me that David Icke has managed to sneak his peculiar brand of conspiracy-driven delusion back into the mainstream, and I think this is mostly due to my English heritage. You see, in England, we all know that David Icke is a complete tool because we've been listening to and laughing at his bullshit since the 1980s. I remember watching a popular talk show as a kid with my parents and seeing this guy appear and declare himself to be the son of God, which he soon followed up with his claims about lizard people and global secret cabals. And I'm guessing this memo about David Icke being an absolute Fruit Loop didn't make it outside the UK, because elsewhere he seems to be treated like some kind of wise old sage. I guess it is a combination of his well-spoken English accent along with his admittedly excellent communication skills. I mean, this guy can definitely tell a story.
He said, I don't know what's going on, but it's not COVID-19, it's not an infectious disease, and I've never seen anything like it.
Wacky shit aside, here's my problem with David Icke. A lot of what he says is wrapped up in some nugget of truth, and it will be about a real world problem. But then you start bolting on absurdity about trans-dimensional lizard vampires, and the entire subject becomes radioactive. You know, for example, there is corruption in the global banking system, and it is something we should be talking about. But to put that discussion alongside vampire lizard people, well, now the whole thing just looks ridiculous, and the banking problem gets branded as a conspiracy theory. To go into it in any more depth would require a video all of its own, and the thought of doing that just makes my blood run cold. So I'll just reiterate what I think is obvious. I think David Icke is a total knob. Now, just to be clear and bringing the conversation back to Brian Rose, I don't think there is necessarily anything wrong with having someone quirky like David Icke on your platform, as long as you're pushing back in the right places. You know, if someone says that they know for a fact that a certain pandemic is actually a hoax being perpetuated by the Illuminati and that 5G cell phone towers are the real cause, then that person needs to bring some pretty fucking solid evidence to the table. And if they don't, then it's the job of the host to push for it, to make them back up their wild claims. Otherwise, you may as well just be having a conversation with Baron Munchausen. And in this regard, Brian Rose utterly failed, which again indicates that he's losing the ability to parse reality from fantasy after his ayahuasca experience. But there's something about how eager Brian is to lap up David Icke's bullshit that makes me think he is seriously losing the ability to think critically.
What do the rest of us do, David? What do we do? What's the way, David? What's the way out of this? Why are you more powerful than they are, David? Why? It seems so clear. It seems so obvious what you just said, David.
This ties into what I was talking about earlier, about how people look outward to try and save the world. Most people I know who are into conspiracy theories are psychologically a complete fucking mess, and they will devote every bit of energy not at themselves and sorting their own shit out. No, they project it outwards to the conspiracy. And while I think it's clear that Brian Rose is still a very high level functioning person, I really question his critical thinking here. And given his reaction when his David Icke video got pulled, then he's also becoming completely irrational. He is so emotionally involved and invested in his own ego that when Google pulled the plug, he just couldn't admit that he might have fucked up and crossed the line. No, instead, he doubled down and furthered the conspiracy theory that big tech is out to get him. So that brings us pretty much up to the present day. And since then, Brian has seemed to slip further up his own arse by asking his devoted followers to send him over $1 million to build his digital freedom platform, which was another of Brian's bombastic announcements for how he was going to revolutionise digital media. But now, having pocketed their money, there isn't really anything to show for it. He's still doing YouTube videos just like he did before. So what did he actually do with the $1 million? In the aftermath of all this, there have been many videos by other YouTubers and various Reddit posts which really highlight that the digital freedom platform was actually a scam and that the $1 million just ended up in Brian Rose's back pocket. Now, one channel that did a great job here in debunking Brian's bullshit is CoffeeZilla, so I'll post some links in the description below for those who want to go further down this rabbit hole. For me though, I'm more interested in the part that relates to psychedelics and integration, and two possibilities spring to mind. Either Brian completely failed to get the message, or the other alternative that nagged at me through this whole thing, which is, yeah, I cannot help but voice a teeny bit of cynicism that Brian Rose actually knows exactly what he's doing in making a lot of noise to feed his ego and to stuff his wallet. You know, there's no such thing as bad publicity, so they say. And if you can make a few loud noises, then maybe you'll make a few headlines. And perhaps that's what Brian Rose was after all along. So, how to wrap this up? I'll reiterate that I don't think Brian Rose is inherently a bad person, but I do think his ego has gone way out of control with a weird combination of delusions of grandeur mixed with paranoid conspiracy theories, and as a result, he is making some extremely questionable decisions. He seems to be under the illusion that he's a figurehead of some kind of digital revolution to solve the world's problems. So it's time for a reality check. If I'm honest, I think guys like Brian here are actually part of the problem. You know, guys in suits who think that just because they picked up some drive-through spirituality on their way back to the boardroom, that the hard work is done and they are now completely self-actualized. And this is not intended as a slur against white-collar workers in office jobs. I myself am one of those people. What I'm talking about here is people who become the suit, where everything is just some kind of business opportunity to screw people over out some money, but somehow they've managed to convince themselves that they are fighting the good fight. And I think Brian Rose has become the living embodiment of that cliched archetype. So no, Brian, simping over David Icke, spreading his dangerous bullshit across the internet, and then scamming people out of $1 million is not going to save the world. It actually makes it shittier. Guys, thank you so much for watching. If you've anything to add about this topic, then feel free to leave me a comment below, or for a more detailed chat, then either head over to my subreddit or to Discord, and we can have a right old jolly chinwag about it. You can also follow me on Instagram, and all those links are in the channel banner on my channel. I want to give a huge extra special shout out to my supporters on Patreon, which is these guys here, but also to all you guys who watch my videos and have to sit through ads to do so. The money that I get from the ads on my videos and from Patreon allow me to fund this nice new lighting rig. So if you're wondering why I suddenly looked all smooth skinned and sparkly eyed, then it's all thanks to you guys. If you find some value in what I do here, then do consider becoming a patron of the channel. You get access to some additional videos, blog posts and Discord rooms, and all for the price of a double cheeseburger. Bargain! Right, that's it for me. I'm going to go and put on my suit of armour and wait for the legion of David Icke fans to spam the dislike button and swarm the comment section with nonsense all about the Queen of England being a shape-shifting reptilian overlord. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time on Adeptus Psychonautica.